has found a way to tell your state how to get better. Reduce the taxes, get right to work, keep everybody happy, downsize your government. So it is my pleasure to introduce one of the greatest economists I've ever worked with, Johathan from the American Legislative Exchange Fund.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight? All right. Well, I tell you what, this is a tough act to follow. We've got Governor Sununu, we had Speaker O'Brien, we've got Chairman Weiler. What a group tonight. And I always say greetings from the land of make-believe, Washington, D.C., where I come from, as President Reagan famously called it, an island surrounded by reality. So anytime I have a chance to get off that island and into reality, and especially when that reality is a live free or die state, I take that opportunity. How about that? Give a hand for live free or die.
You might have to pull the laptop a little bit.
Okay. So as we're here, as you've heard, Chuck Schumer is working to shut down the federal government. And as Reagan had a point, this is an island surrounded by reality. All of you here have to balance a budget. All of you as business owners, you as state government, state legislators, you have to work on that. Us in Washington, not so much. I don't think I saw too many fans of Nancy Pelosi's reaction to the tax cuts, if I remember hearing that correctly earlier. So if you remember correctly, you remember what she said first. What did she say first? It was going to be Armageddon, right? So then the Dow soars to more than 26,000, an all-time record where all of your 401ks and even the state pension funds are doing well. Then she revises that to crumbs. Now, folks, it really takes a San Francisco limousine liberal to say that $1,000 or $2,000 in the pocketbook of the average American is crumbs. Who agrees with that? And just today, we hit 200 companies that have announced raises, bonuses, and more charitable contributions because of the tax cuts. And I usually start this presentation by talking about how long it's been since we've seen tax reform at the federal level. Folks, do you recall who was president last time we saw tax reform before Donald Trump signed that into law around Christmas time as a Christmas present for all of us? It was the great Ronald Reagan in 1986. Folks, that was a long time ago, 86. You know what was number one at the box office in 1986? Top Gun was number one at the box office in 1986 with Tom Cruise. That's how long it's been. Folks, this is a game changer for American business. The American businesses across this country as corporations paid the highest taxes in the industrialized world at 35% federal and then 5 or 6% at the state and local level. Now today, 21%. This is not a silver bullet, but it's a great start. It's a game changer in moving the direction and bringing jobs back to America. One thing on the horizon in Washington I'm going to briefly talk about because it is of utmost concern to New Hampshire. And then we're going to talk about what you can do to make even New Hampshire more competitive at the state level. Right now, as we're standing here, the United States Supreme Court has just announced they're going to hear a challenge to the ban on internet tax collection across states. Now, of course, live free or die, you do the right thing and avoid an income tax, you do the right thing and avoid a sales tax, you value freedom, you value limited government. That's always been a very net positive. Now, what is the Supreme Court doing? The tax and spend crowd from high tax states mostly is out there looking to allow out-of-state entities, there's 12,000 taxing jurisdictions in the United States, state and local, the ability to come after New Hampshire businesses to be unpaid tax collectors for them. That has been disallowed by the Supreme Court since 1992. That ruling is under threat right now. It's a challenge. The Supreme Court is going to hear this term. We'll know in June what happens to that threat. But I hope that all of you pay attention to it. It's flying under the radar, and I hope all of you watch very closely what the court does, because when the court's done, it will then move to Congress to decide what the fate of New Hampshire businesses will be. You and the other 4 no sales tax states. A very important issue here that could affect economic development for years and years ahead. Let me talk for a moment about the state issues. So I represent an organization, even though today I'm here as an individual. My organization is the American Legislative Exchange Council. We believe in 3 major principles: free markets, limited government, and federalism. Anybody object to that today? No? All right. You all agree? Pretty fundamentally American principles. That's what Chairman Weiler and Senator Daniels and the vast majority of all of our ALEC members across New Hampshire have been involved with us to support over the years. We watch what happens across the states. I travel to 35 states a year. I've been to all 50 states to work with state legislators to promote freedom. And I'll tell you what, my books, as was mentioned, Rich States, Poor States with Art Laffer and Steve Moore. And we're going to go through a couple of the summaries of that a little bit later, but grab a copy before you leave. What we find, though, if you were to summarize our thousands and thousands of hours of research in 10 years now of producing the book, it can be summarized as this: freedom works. And when you have the opportunity to promote freedom in a state like New Hampshire, you're giving all of us a great study to point towards. You are a light in a sea of darkness in New England, supporting lower taxes and limited government. So give yourself a hand for that and all the hard work that entails. I just had a piece on Drudge Report today that I wrote. It was a column for The Hill, and it was talking about just how Americans vote with their feet and go from state to state for more opportunity and lower taxes and more freedom. You know what? The numbers that just came out over Christmas show that the no-income tax states are going to gain another 5 congressional seats in the United States House after the census of 2020. That's a good thing. I know that here in New Hampshire, you've had a commission recently looking at one of the biggest threats to state finances, and I hope that they're able to propose some solutions to help taxpayers keep tax burdens down, keep property taxes down here in future years in New Hampshire, and that is the issue of unfunded pension liabilities across states. Now, generally, and I don't see too many people giving me this face, generally when you talk about pensions and government accounting, you have about 15 seconds before you get the pension look, and people's eyes glaze over because it is a bit of a dull topic. Now, I'm a tax economist at the end of the day. We're used to boring topics. You know, there's an old joke about tax economists such as myself. You know the difference between an introverted tax economist and an extroverted tax economist, right? The difference, I'm glad you asked, the difference is the introverted tax economist looks at his shoes when he talks to you. But on the other hand, the extroverted tax economist looks at your shoes when he talks to you. So that's the world that I come from, and we try to make it a little bit of fun. You got to go through all these numbers and all these census reports, so you got to have a little fun with it. But one of the issues when it comes to pensions is this. And you can debate over what the solution is, but I think we all kind of know what the solution needs to be, and that is what the private sector's done 20 or 30 years ago, and that is go to 401ks for new hires. Folks, government is playing games with pensions. They don't follow generally accepted accounting principles. If you or any CEOs or CFOs here in the private sector, when you sign off on financial statements, you would go to jail if you use the kind of accounting that state and local governments use to calculate pension obligations. If they got a problem, they just assume they're going to earn 7 or 8% for the next 30 years of investment. I mean, if you can get me that kind of investment, sign me up right now. I'll put you in charge of my 401k, risk-free, 8%. Are you kidding me, right? So I think there's one thing we can all agree upon is changes need to be made, whatever those might be. And then I think there's another thing, even with your liberal nephew or niece or aunt or uncle when you get together for the holidays, and that is this. Can we all agree that we don't want our state or our city to be the next Detroit? Okay? Anybody agree? Remember the bankruptcy? I'm from Michigan. I've lived that pretty closely. Here are the three takeaways from the bankruptcy judge himself, Stephen Rhodes. This is a 30-year legal career. Here was his three takeaways. Make your pension plan payments, make sure you're calculating the liability properly, and then switch from the defined benefit model and look at things like 401ks for new hires. That's the biggest threat, I think, going forward, not just for New Hampshire, but for every single state budget and state financial situation out there. So I've got a few pieces of data on taxes. First of all, you remember the great Ronald Reagan. My favorite, maybe perhaps the best in our lifetimes, although President Trump's off to a pretty fast start in year one. Ronald Reagan summed up the liberal view of the economy. You remember how he summed up the liberal view of the economy? If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. That's the approach right now that we're seeing in the liberal states, the high tax states that have high taxes on everyone across the board, and then they want to pay special favorites with certain companies to come and invest in their state. You know, New Jersey, that basket case that's one of your best economic development tools in New Hampshire, they just said they're going to give Amazon $7 billion to come and invest in their state if they move their headquarters there. Folks, here's a novel concept. How about just have lower taxes and a better business environment across the board for any company that wants to come into the state? That's the New Hampshire advantage. But New York has given, they take the cake on this. They've given away more than 52,000 specific tax favorites to one company over another over the last 15 years. And don't look to me for this data. This isn't a conservative group that provided this. This is that rabid conservative group, the New York Times, that put this together. 52,000 special tax breaks out of New York alone. Now, how's that working for them? We saw the new census numbers that came out. New York is down nearly 1.5 million Americans over the last 10 years alone. They've voted with their feet, and they've gone to places like you can see on the screen. Texas, 1.3 million new residents over the last 10 years. Florida, over 800,000 new residents over the last 10 years. Clearly, the tax and spend model of California, New York, Illinois, and New Jersey is not working. That is why we as conservatives have competition to look towards. This is what keeps conservative ideas at the forefront, because states need to live within their means, they need to balance their budgets, and they need to make sure they keep taxes in check, because if they don't, they're going to end up in a situation like New York, where they're spending a lot per capita for K-12, they're spending a lot across the board on the budget, but they're educating the workforce of Texas and Florida. That's not a position you want to be in. This is a little bit hard to see, so let me illustrate this. This goes back 50 years. New York is down 14 congressional districts in the United States House on net over the last 50 years because of the outmigration phenomenon that I just talked about. That's 14 more people who are not there to vote like Chuck Schumer. How about that? And based out of the numbers that are just out from the census, the big winners, Texas will gain another 2 to 3 congressional seats. Florida will gain another 2 congressional seats. Arizona will gain, Colorado will gain, Montana, North Carolina, down the line, fiscally conservative states that are going to be gaining congressional seats in 2020. The losers, Illinois, they're going to lose maybe 1 to 2 more congressional seats. New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, for the first time since 1789, will be down to 1 congressional seat. That is what liberal tax and spend policies do to a state economy, unfortunately. Let me skip over a couple things here, but let me bring you to a conclusion, in that not all taxes are created equally. You in New Hampshire get it right with the New Hampshire advantage that you avoid a personal income tax. That is one of the most damaging ways for states to raise revenue. Obviously, states need to raise revenue to fund core government services, but by using an income tax, the model of California, of New York, having high income taxes is driving away business owners, is driving away economic opportunity. And what we do on this slide here, and if you'd like, I'll be able to send you these slides if you'd like to give me your business card afterwards, or many of these are in the book as well if you'd like to grab a book. The 9 states without income taxes, New Hampshire included, versus the 9 states with the highest income taxes over the last 10 years of economic growth, whether it's GDP, population growth, tax receipt growth, or job growth, the no income tax states have the New Hampshire advantage working for all of them because they value work, they value savings, they value investment. It gets back to, as our Laffer always likes to say, folks, this isn't rocket surgery. This is economics 101. This is financial basics. When you tax something, you get less of it. When you tax something less, you get more of it. And as long as Americans continue to have the freedom to vote with their feet from state to state and choose their best opportunities, they're going to do that. And that's good for all of us. Let me finalize the conversation by going over New Hampshire's ranking in rich states, poor states. You've made some really important gains and you've gotten into the top 20, which is really important, but there's some work to be done. You may be asking what could be done to move New Hampshire, let's say, into the top 10. Well, once again, I'm glad you asked. I have an answer for you. If you go to our website, richstatespoorstates.org, you can look for yourself. But 2 policy changes would move New Hampshire from number 18 to number 6 in rich states, poor states. And that would be, first of all, enacting a right-to-work policy. I think we have a few supporters of right-to-work in the House today. That is a game changer. It's a yes or no equation for many, many businesses. In fact, Kentucky and Missouri just became number 27 and number 28 right-to-work states in America this last year. And within the first few months of Kentucky enacting right-to-work, they had a massive new aluminum manufacturing facility be built in the state for the sole purpose that they became a right-to-work state. They were waiting for Kentucky to be a right-to-work state. And as many of you know, my background being from Michigan, I never thought in my lifetime I would see my home state of Michigan as a right-to-work state. But we stand here today as Michigan as a freedom-to-work state, giving employees the freedom whether or not to join a union. We can give that a round of applause as well. And let me tell you one thing just for a moment to put on a political hat. That is, not one Republican incumbent state legislator who voted for right-to-work in Michigan lost their re-election in the following election. So for those who say that right-to-work is bad for your future, don't sell that to the Michigan representatives who all went forward and ran on that issue because it's such an important economic victory. And I feel like I'm in California for a second here with the brownout from the electricity. But the final slide is one that I always like to show of how important these issues are on a bipartisan basis. And if we don't get it up, let me just paraphrase. How many know who the governor, well, first of all, let me start with this. How many of you follow Connecticut politics? So everyone here knows that Connecticut really shouldn't be considered a right-of-center state by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, their governor is Daniel Malloy. Anyone know Daniel Malloy? He's a 2-term liberal Democrat. He, in fact, ran the Democrat Governors Association, the DGA, in the last cycle. And you may remember the story of Connecticut where they recently taxed out of existence a small family business by the name of General Electric. Now, you remember where General Electric went. General Electric went to Massachusetts. Now, there's a joke in there somewhere that if you're losing companies, leaving your state, going to Massachusetts for lower taxes, you've got a real problem as a state. And don't take my word for this. Take Daniel Malloy. He said, we've raised taxes multiple times and it's not working. What we need is economic growth. Folks, that's Daniel Malloy, liberal Democrat governor. That just shows you this should not be a partisan issue. This is an issue not necessarily of left or right. As Ronald Reagan would say, this is an issue of up versus down for the future of the states and the future of New Hampshire. So, we've covered a lot of material. I think we might have a few minutes to have any questions of anything that you might like to cover of all the things that I talked about today. But let me just finalize by saying this. Keep up fighting the good fight for economic liberty and economic freedom in New Hampshire. We need you to continue to point towards as a beacon of hope in states that are struggling in New England. Thanks very much for having me today. I think we might have time for a question or two.
Yes.
We have a question over here.
So one of the items on your list for New Hampshire is workman's comp.
Yep.
We have high workman's comp, especially compared to Massachusetts, but we don't know why. Do you have any suggestions of specific?
Well, yeah, the question is on workers' comp, and that's one of our 15 factors when we go into measuring a state. As I mentioned, New Hampshire's 18th out of the 50 states, with one being best, and this is one of the best rankings, though, that New Hampshire has seen in our 10 years of doing the rich states, poor states rare tax at the national level, and have people just buy things and pay taxes on everything and then get rid of income taxes. First of all, I think that's the model of the 9 states without income taxes, that they basically follow the fair tax concept mostly, is that they have a sales tax, with New Hampshire being the exception to that. They have sales taxes, they do without income taxes. The one hurdle that we have at the federal level is Congress. I mean, who here trusts Congress necessarily to say, let's enact a national sales tax and then give us the promise that they're going to repeal the income tax or lower the income tax? How many years do you think it's going to take before they raise the income tax back up to where it is today, and then we're stuck with the national sales tax? That's the concern. So what you would need to do, and people who have looked at this issue say, the 16th Amendment, you know, for the first 100 years of our history, 130 years of our history, we did without an income tax. It was ruled unconstitutional repeatedly by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 16th Amendment in 1913 did away with that. So I suppose without the 16th Amendment authorizing an income tax, that would be the way to stop a federal income tax and transition to a fair tax. I don't think we get there unless we put a constitutional restriction on not having an income tax. But as I always say to the fair tax people nationally is, instead of just 9 no income tax states, we probably need to have some more case studies at the state level for states repealing their income taxes and have 10, 11, 12, and then see the amount of economic growth that happens after they move to more of a consumption tax and away from an income tax. But very good question. Final question? Let me just let me end with this. Let me give you the cautionary tale of New Jersey, one of your best economic development programs. Once again, New Jersey, if you rewind the clock to 1965, and this is why spending is so important, and this is why when I see leaders like Representative Weiler and Senator Daniels keep a lid on spending, it's so important. Because New Jersey in 1965 had neither an income tax nor a sales tax. They were live free or die, in a way, in 1965. What happened? They spent money. They had property taxes get too high. They had schools that continued demanded more money without giving better results. And instead of going for efficiency and limited government, they created a sales tax. And they said, well, we're going to buy down the property tax if we have a sales tax. They didn't control spending, so they had property taxes get too high. So what did they do? They enacted an income tax several years later. They didn't control spending. And now today, fast forward, they have some of the highest income, sales, and property taxes in America. That, folks, is why we need to keep a close watch on government spending, because these gains that you fought so hard for over these years to protect are not guaranteed going forward. If we don't control spending, the New Hampshire advantage could be eroded. So it's vigilance is going to be what it takes to continue the New Hampshire advantage. Thank you for your commitment to free markets, limited government, federalism, and thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
John, if there's